In this video, we'll be taking a look at what is known as pivot point. This is a very important concept in 3D softwares. So to understand this better, let's move this object a little above the grid. Now, in Blender, each object has its own origin point, and you can tell where origin of an object is by looking at this orange dot. You can see by default it's in the center of each object that we have. So this cube origin or this orange dot is in the center. Now, sometimes we need to change this because a lot of the things that you did in Blender depend on this. For example, if I press S to scale, you can see how object is scaling towards that origin point. And same thing with rotation, it's going to rotate around that point. So you can see how scaling and rotation is dependent on that origin point. But sometimes there are scenarios where we would want to change this. So if you click on the second icon on the header, it's our transform pivot point. It lets you change that. So by default, you can see it says median point. What it means is that if I create a copy of this by pressing Shift D and move it along the x-axis, and then let's just create a few more copies, something like here. Now if I make a selection like this, and let's enable the remove gizmo so you can see it better, you can see that this manipulator is now appearing in the sort of center of my selection, but not like exactly in the center. That's because it's finding a median point. And the median point basically means whichever side has more object origins. So you can see we have three object origins here. So this is going to sort of move more towards these three objects. And if we move it towards this one, and let's make a selection again, now it's going to be in the center. So it sort of depends on where most of your objects are when you make a selection. Then this manipulator is going to be displayed there. And now if we rotate, you can see how it's rotating around that. Scaling is also going to happen towards that. So that's our first option, median point. Now we have this bounding box option. This is going to be like, for example, if we go here and let's make a selection. So now you can see that this is not exactly in the center because it's using median point. But if we go ahead and switch it to bounding box, now you can see it sort of moves back to center. So what's happening here is that, just to demonstrate, let's press Shift D to duplicate and move it along the x-axis. And then here on this object tab, you don't have to worry about it too much for now. And then down here we have viewport display, so it just changes some options for the object. Down here we have display as, and we're going to show it, set it to bounce. So this is going to make our object just like sort of bounce and outline. Now we're going to press S to scale along x-axis, and let's also sort of move it slightly like that, and then we're going to scale it on the y-axis. So something like here. So Blender is drawing an imaginary box like this when we make a selection, and then it's setting our manipulator or origin point to that center of that sort of block that it's creating, imaginary sort of block. So that's why we have this bounding box center. I'll go ahead and get rid of that. We have 3D cursor. It's going to use this 3D cursor that we have in our scene. We can move that 3D cursor to different places by holding down Shift and then right clicking. So if I make a selection, this manipulator is going to be displayed there. So if we select 3D cursor, you can see how it snaps there, and now we can use that as our rotation point. We can also sort of scale our objects towards it. And if I want to move that, I can just Shift right click here, and now I can rotate my objects along this area. So bounding box is going to create an imaginary box around your object or selection, and then use that as the pivot point. And then we have this 3D cursor. Finally, we have individual origins. So now if we rotate our objects, you can see each object is going to use its own origin for rotation, and same thing for scaling. So this can be really helpful in a lot of different situations. For example, if you have car wheels and you want to sort of scale each wheel without it moving, you can use sort of individual origins and those kinds of things. Finally, we have active elements. So this is going to use your last selected object or active element. So if we make a selection like this, let's shift click here. So this is our active selection now, and you can see how it's moving there. But if we shift click here, that's going to move there, and then we can use it. So that's how you can use transform pivot point.